Mm.
It's from Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Okay, got it.
Such a great show.
One of the shows I haven't caught up on.
I was thinking of Larry David this morning. Oh, I think it was because of the whole Howard Stern thing with Ted Danson and making the connection of how close Ted Danson and Larry David are, and those episodes are so funny. I love them.
Yeah. Latte, there's this like thing about Latte Larry's scone, and it's a whole big thing. It's really funny.
Very good. Well, Aspen is very slow with no food and wine this week, but still looks and feels beautiful. Miss you guys very much out here.
Yeah, it's a shame we're not all together right now.
I know it.
Yeah, I'm missing it.
Actually, the last time the four of us were together was in LA.
That's right.
BevCon.
Yep.
Yeah.
LP, EP, whatever.
That was a lot of fun. Right before the airport.
Mm-hmm.
That was a good trip. I wish they still did that conference. So 1 minute. Hopefully everybody's starting to join.
T-.
Yeah, I'll take your lead as far as what
Absolutely.
Great.
Saab's really good at his job, so we just let him take it and run with it. We call him, he's the elder statesman, the older brother.
Yep.
Thanks, kids.
We love you. Your dad's favorite. Okay, let's get going, Saab.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us on another edition of Freerun Talks, where we dive into all the news in the food and beverage industry. Today, we are joined by a friend and amazing person and guest today, Alice Cheng, the founder and CEO of Culinary Agents. Hey, Alice.
Hey, Alice.
For those that don't know Alice or Culinary Agents, it's a hospitality-centric site that connects job seekers with potential employers and provides some amazing resources and insights for hospitality professionals around the country. Full disclosure, I've been able to work with Alice over the years as an advisor in some capacities, so it's great to see how the company has evolved and see what they're doing to help us all as an industry. So thanks for being here today, Alice. And
it's great,
Mike, you are joining us. You're the roving correspondent. You are in Aspen, Colorado. I don't think anybody told you that Food and Wine's actually not happening this year.
No, it was a great disappointment when I showed up and I had already booked a place and they said, I didn't see the white tents and I said, what's going on here? And sure enough, it has been canceled, but I stayed. So here we are. And
you're making the most of it.
That's right, and live from Little Nell, and I can't thank these guys enough, but Chubby and his team have been unbelievable, and we've had a few meals here, and what they're doing is, I'm extremely impressed. Ajax has expanded their outside footprint. Everyone's in masks, feels super comfortable here. The food has been terrific, so thank you to the Little Nell for letting me be here for today's show.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for Little Nell also for letting me be here and Dustin be here, because all roads have come through that dining room right there behind you. So
that's right.
If those walls could talk.
Well, we not for this. Yeah.
Different show.
Not safe for work.
So Mike, you've been doing a lot of reading, which I'm really proud of. And one of the things that you shared with us, I'm not sure if you shared or Dustin, but really caught your attention was, we've been talking a lot about pivots, and you sent over an article about sons and daughters in San Francisco. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually, Dustin was the one who shared it last week, and I think it was a couple of days ago, maybe. And I read it, and it struck a chord with me because I've often just thought about the no tipping model, and clients have asked me about it. But just in my own life, I have to say, at a fine dining level, I feel that I'm dining with professionals, professional servers, professional wait staff, professional chefs, and I feel like why do I need to tip? It should be included in the price, and I know that doesn't sound good. I don't mean to say that they should make less. I mean to say that it should just be included. And I know, Saab, you probably have more experience hands-on than any of us with this. But that's what caught my eye with the Sons and Daughters article. So what they've done is pivoted, pulled out almost 50% of their tables. It's a very small restaurant, if I'm not mistaken. And they went from 10 tables to 6, increased the salary of all servers, or I think everybody, to at least $65,000, and nobody can make over $90,000. There will be no tipping. There will be an 18% service charge. And then the price of food went, I'm going to pull this out. I don't have it offhand, but I think it was like $110 for a menu to $130, something like that. But correct me if I'm wrong. So the price of food went up. The service charge of 18% is included in the check, and there's no tipping. I like that. I know what I'm getting. I'm an educated man. I can look at a menu. I can look at a website, and it says, Mike, this is what you're paying. Coming in or not? I'm coming in. I like that. So it takes the whole tipping charade out of it, and I like that. What do you guys think? A lot
Dustin,
of
you said
I know you guys are so scared to talk about this.
I guess when it comes down to it, I really like that model as well. I think just from a guest experience point of view, it's really nice. I've dined at places that are doing the hospitality included or no tipping. And it's just nice to, when you get the check, that the bill is the bill. You're not adding anything else on. It's just like, oh, all I have to do is sign my name and we're done. I also like it from the point of view that you're treating your team as professionals, as you said, Mike. And I think there's a stigma that came along for a very long time when it came to restaurant staff or the teams that, if you're a waiter, you're a bartender or something, there's something inherently wrong with that. And you're working for tips and there's this kind of service mentality. You're working to get my tip. When I think, at the types of restaurants that all of us are like to go to and, frankly, have worked at, we take that job very seriously, and it's typically a very long-term play for us. And, we are in it to win it for a while. And I think to treat your teams, to have the ability to treat your teams with that element of respect of saying like, hey, we're bringing you on salary, or this is going to be your wage, and it's a very livable wage, and it's very in line with, maybe some other industries. I think that's a really nice message that you can send to your teams. Now, I don't think that it works for all restaurant models. It just doesn't. I think it works a little bit better on the high end. I think, more casual restaurants might have a hard time doing that. A place where you go to get burgers, are you going to be more comfortable spending an extra $5, $8 or whatever it is on a burger? You're getting into price comparison and price competitiveness there that I think makes it a little tricky. So keeping the prices low and then adding a tip is a way to kind of circumvent that. But that's kind of my position on it.
Mm-hmm. Alice, you with Culinary Agents, you connect restaurants and potential employees. As you've heard or had to help educate people about that, I mean, we work together at USHG. Did you have any insights or learnings from employees as they tried to navigate that in either way, or personal experiences?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting at this point in time is this, I hone in on the word pivot. It's kind of an opportunity now where businesses, some because they absolutely have to, and some because it's opportunistic, take a step back and look at what is my post-pandemic business strategy? What is my hiring strategy? How can I actually run a business? What is the tolerance that my guests will have or expect? How do I almost reset? If, I think the interesting thing when we talked about this, I would say years ago now, is that there was a big guest education kind of curve. There was a lot of, well, we don't have to. And, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Or if it's too difficult to sway the pendulum, then let's just, keep things as they are. What we have now, which I think is opportunistic for a lot of businesses to consider, is this almost reimagining, how can we be innovative? People are forced to look at what is reduced capacity. What does that mean from a guest standpoint, from a team standpoint? How should I be looking at or consider reskilling, upskilling, cross-skilling? How can I better compensate? One of the things, and we can get into it in more detail, is when we did the survey for talent to be a little bit of their voice to understand what are their main concerns. The top two were health, personal health and safety. But the second one, and arguably front of house versus back of house, depending on how you splice the data, was financial security. And it was this ongoing uneasiness of like, what does this mean to me? How am I going to be, how do I have some financial stability going back into the industry because I love the industry and I definitely want to return to it. So I actually think it's a really opportune time for businesses to take a step back, and if they ever had an inclining of trying to do it, to kind of taking another crack at it, because the reality is a lot of folks are having to think out of the box and make some changes.
Mm-hmm.
I think you brought up a couple of good points that that as I think about it, it is great to see them pivoting it. And they're saying, okay, our business model is changing. How do we change things moving forward? And I think everybody touched on it, whether it be professionalism or professionalizing the space, consistency in wages. Those are all really important factors. The biggest challenge that we encountered at USHG was guest education, or one of the biggest challenges, because guests assume one of two things. One, I'm leaving a tip and it goes all to that employee that's taking care of me tonight. Or they say, I'm giving you this tip and this tip goes to everybody in the restaurant. Both are incorrect. And helping them understand that. And also the fact that they've been underpaying for food all this time. The true cost of the meal is not necessarily built into it. And so helping them get their heads around it was a big challenge. And in New York, hospitality included was the only way we could do it due to the regulations. We couldn't add a surcharge, couldn't add an admin fee. And the difference between those is somewhat semantics, but there are legal definitions, but those legal definitions are not the same in every state or in every city. So for example, in New York, we can't add a service charge or an admin fee to an a la carte dining situation. In Chicago and San Francisco, you can. And I personally think that, through this time and an opportunity to make change, if we could in New York add an admin fee to it, to the bill, I think that would be an amazing opportunity, because now, what better time than now, as it's sort of easier to introduce that, rather than having to pivot an entire restaurant concept. Guests still look at the menu, see the same price, but then the surcharge is added to it. And then you can distribute amongst the team, because I do think with the reduced capacity, the inefficiencies that are now going to be built into restaurants as they're ramping up, the staff is not going to be able to make as much. So if you can provide them with some consistency and pay across the board, I think that's a big win. So I applaud sons and daughters for doing it. And I hope that, I know there has been some talk with the Hospitality Alliance in New York about that, and seeing if there is a chance to permit that now, but I'm not sure what the current status is of that. But I'm a fan of admin fees, and but I also have to say it's also different state by state. I remember when we had restaurants in Texas, I was even just trying to get the staff around, the heads around it. A lot of restaurants outside of the fine dining world are still in the mindset of, you get your tips, you stick them in your pocket, you tip people out, but it's not a pooled house. And even just getting a pooled house across to people and understanding that was a real challenge in education of the team. And ultimately, we actually gave it a try in multiple restaurants around the country and then pulled it back. I'm not even talking about hospitality included. I'm just talking about pooling tips to help foster teamwork. So
yeah, I definitely think there's a big difference between the higher end dining and the more casual dining. And I think, the idea of just tipping at a diner or, burger stand or something like that, I doubt that could ever really go away. I mean, it probably could, but it just doesn't seem likely. But, more of my clients seem to be looking for a solution to keep the back of the house engaged and happy, in a part of the overall process. And so, you can make a lot, in some situations, again, $65,000 to $90,000 at Sons and Daughters, that's a hell of a wage. That's really nice. A lot of lawyers come out of law school making 45 to 65. And so, you are a professional and you're making great money. And then the back of the house would say, well, where's my part of that? And so if you can make everybody in the restaurant a part of the restaurant and a part of the business, it seems to me that's just going to increase the overall positivity and product.
Yeah, I think
100%. And I think the challenges that that we're seeing, and we have seen, especially in some of the bigger cities where the cost of living has gone up, back of house wages have not. But every other cost that is folded into the price of a dish, as that dish increases, back of house doesn't get an increase, but the
Right.
front of house does, because they are now, the prices go up, people tip 20% and still tip 20%. and the front of house continues to make more. So the disparity between front and back of house only continues to grow. And you then run into the challenge where you have front of house staff that's making more than the managers. And so it's this really convoluted, vicious cycle that we go into. So,
we'll keep an eye on
that's
it.
a whole other conversation for another day.
Real quick, I'm sorry, Dustin, go ahead.
To tie it back together, I think Alice makes a really good point that, if you're going to try it, now's a really good time to pivot. Now's a good time to try it.
Yeah.
And it's not going to work in every type of restaurant setting. It's certainly not going to work in every market. To Saab's point, the culture in different markets, when you get outside of some of the big cities, if they're not even getting to a pulled house yet, they're definitely not thinking about, tips included. But in those bigger markets, in the big cities where it's a more savvy restaurant culture, now is a pretty good time to maybe look at your business model and say, hey, how can we readjust things to come out of this on the other side with both our culture intact, get the morale behind it, and then also have a better business model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, people walking away from a table after a no tipping experience, it's like, wow, this is great. It's like the first time you got out of an Uber and you're like, oh, I don't have to pay anything, I don't have to swipe. Like, this is convenient. Yeah. And
then they went ahead and ruined that,
So,
but on one point though, on that, the final, just to close the loop on this one, a fixed, this is a good opportunity for restaurants to be doing like a price fixed menu, because, we're in a very limited service space. And I don't think you should ever have a prefix menu without a tip included. Just, here is the menu for the evening. It is $100. It is $200. Every tax and tip included. That you even prepay for it. It's great. And so this is a good opportunity to retrain the client or guest that, hey, when you paid the $50 for your dinner, that was all in, and 3 months from now, why are we changing that? So I agree, Alice. Now is a good time to just use the government PPP money to test these things and see what happens. But anyway, All right. Also in the news. I'm sorry. Are you guys want to keep talking about no tipping?
All right, one more thing.
Okay. Yeah. Come on. Let's go.
That was going to kill me. But Sabado, where can people, if you're a restaurateur and you're thinking about maybe considering this process, where's a resource maybe that people could go to and get some more information about how this works and how to structure this? Because I think some people might not understand all the implications and changes that would need to happen with this.
Sure. Sigaria@mac.com. I think that's
I was just going to say, can they hire you?
I mean, that's what's so challenging. It's different by every single market.
Well done, Dustin. Well done.
And I think it is something that I am passionate about, done a lot of homework over the years about it and tried to navigate it. And there's no perfect solution that I've found in New York, but I think it is definitely a conversation that needs to keep on evolving, because I think we were ahead of our time when we launched at USHG, and we did the best that we could, but I still think there's some great work that still can be done, and there's great examples of it working elsewhere in other markets that we could learn from. So
yeah, I wasn't expecting you to put yourself out there like that, but I'm glad you did.
Honored
for the betterment of our industry.
Okay. So. Also in the news, and this is topical up here in Aspen again, reading the papers, 2 restaurants reopened over the last couple of weeks, and have already had to close due to COVID, employees testing positive for COVID. So one of them on Friday, and then one last night. And so it's very real. It became very real to me. I got up here on Thursday, and then Saturday we got the news about the first restaurant closing on Friday, and I'm going to say it sent a little bit of a shockwave through Aspen. Just people were talking about it, and you're now wondering, okay, what's the next restaurant to have this, or the next hotel? I mean, pretty much the city just kind of opened up over the last week, and a lot of the hotels just opened up on the 12th. And so there's only really been an influx of tourists over the past, 10 days. So very, very concerning. And, this is going to lead into, I know what Alice wants to talk about is, what does this do to employee morale? And are you scared to go to work? And how embarrassed are you to be the employee that has it, even though it's not your fault? And what does this do? Does this encourage testing, or, does it kind of want to prevent you from going to get tested? Because if you don't get tested, you can't test positive. And so, what goes here? What goes on here? And so as the cases increase across the country, are we going to see more of this? And how? I mean, the answer's got to be yes. But how do employers help ease the concerns of the employees? I mean, are you just going to shut down for 2 weeks every time? I don't know. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting. I read that article, and it said that the city of Aspen didn't require people to
Good point.
close,
Yeah,
but they took proactive measures to do it because they were self-quarantining. In one case, it was just the two owners, so they both had to quarantine. And who can run the restaurant if they're not there? So it's sort of this your slim down service.
Yeah, you're already
level.
on a skeleton crew, and if if your key men aren't able to be there, what are you going to do? And again, so I think one of the restaurants was told you do not have to close. That's from Pitkin County. You do not have to close, but they did anyway for 14 days. And the other restaurant, I didn't read one way or the other, but I believe is closed for 3 days. But how? Let's say you open up on Thursday of this week. How could you possibly go eat there? And I'm not, for people who know what restaurant I'm talking about, I'm not suggesting that you don't, but let's be realistic. How could you be comfortable, or how can the employees be comfortable going back to work? So,
and we've seen those cases rise of recent in Florida and Texas and Arizona, and I think it's a trend that we're going to see more of these happening with it, and it's really devastating. We've talked about before how yes, you can do everything you can, but in a lot of cases too, especially in a town like Aspen where you have so many tourists, you could be doing everything possible with your team to be safe, but then somebody comes in from the outside, and that's what actually increases the opportunity for infection. And so if you can operate with your doors closed and figure out how to get by, I think that's a win.
Yeah, we have a comment here from somebody that says, from Brooke Renee, Dallas, Texas in general has been brutal in terms of COVID closures in the last few weeks. So it is going on. I haven't seen it in Boulder yet, where I generally am, and so it is going on. And
I think sadly,
it's going to have to continue.
Most vulnerable restaurants again are going to be the smaller ones, the ones with limited staff, or the ones where they have, like you said, a couple of key people that need to be there, whether it's front of house or back of house. Because if you're paying attention to the science of it, the virus can live on surfaces for only a certain amount of time, right? So if you have a big enough team, theoretically, to quarantine the people who are in contact with the person infected, you can put them away for 2 weeks, but you give your space a couple of days, you can actually reopen, and it's very safe by that point because the virus doesn't live on surface long enough. Call it three days, I think is what is the standard on that. And I've seen that happen here in New York with grocery stores. We've had grocery stores around us that, massive teams of people, somebody caught COVID, they shut down for 3 days and then just reopen again. So it kind of cleanses the space. But, the teams that can do that, that's great. But then, if you're a small restaurant with a limited team or that key man kind of position, you kind of have to do the full 2 weeks. And it's just like a nail in the coffin almost in this situation.
So just to put on your diner's hat, and we've been watching sort of how New York's unfolded the past week. What have you seen from New York? I mean, we're still not open. We're still not at outdoor dining officially yet. But what are you seeing, and how does that make you feel as a diner?
Yeah, I mean, look, as a diner, and of course, as the weather is getting nicer, people have been kind of shelter in place for a while. It's a little frustrating when you go walk down a block and you see people just blatantly sitting there and dining with no mask. And I think one of the things that I think is in the back of everyone's mind is if we don't do this together or try to get to the next phase together, somebody's going to ruin it for the rest of them, right? And I think in cities where there is a formal ways where people are reporting because everyone is looking out for each other, it's a good thing because action can be taken quickly. In other areas where it may not be literally people on top of people and folks calling to reporting, I think we'll have to see what happens from there, right? I think the biggest thing throughout all of this is trust and transparency. And I think when you talk about, the guest and the employee and the business owner, you're looking at a triangle of trust and transparency. And where we're seeing businesses as they're preparing, one of the best practices that I see and has seen most recently is being really clear to both guests and employees, and almost like having one playbook that clearly shows guests how you're training your teams and educating them and protecting them so that they can in turn provide the service and the experience. But then there's also, I get back to this education piece where guests being educated on what's expected of them, right? And not in a scolding way, but kind of like, we're going to do our part. And we're here to protect you, make sure you have the best experience, but this is how you can help. This is how you can make the experience good for yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Coming up to a hostess stand and being upset because, you know, the person isn't greeting you a certain way, or they have a mask on and it doesn't feel, you know, the way it used to.
Where they're smiling at you, they have a mask on. Yeah.
Right. It's not helping, right? And at the same time, you see employers update their training about how you can kind of show that you're smiling and welcoming behind a mask. So there's a lot of little things, little hints and tips and tricks that we're seeing. But I think the underlying thing is to build and establish this transparency of information and subsequently the trust, and doing that in a way where information is out there, guests can read it and see it before they decide if they're going to come in, when they can come in and dine. I think another thing is for businesses, what we've seen them do in the past couple of months is, you know, get really creative with, again, opportunistically, is this the right time to introduce different revenue streams? Is this a time to experiment with, you know, selling swag, whatever it may be, right? Because I think the entrepreneur spirit of, you know, a lot of independent restaurants, and of course, you know, the kind of survival and kind of grit of the workers in the industry, everyone have kind of, after the first couple of weeks of, you know, wow, this is really happening, kind of put on their creative thinking caps and said, okay, what do we do? And I think, you know, businesses who have experimented with and who have now introduced different revenue streams and different ways to communicate with their guests are kind of building in redundancies into their business, where if something happens with the guest experience, you know, perhaps, and they can educate their guests on, okay, well, that happened here, but this is how we run this part of our business, our takeaway or delivery, and it's unaffected, or whatever it may be. But that information and making it available and clear to the guest and to your teams, I think is going to be a real game changer for some of these businesses.
I mean, this weekend, for anybody that didn't see it, there were some pictures that were of East Village and Soho, where it looked like it was just like, you know, streets of New Orleans in some sense. And it's the kind of things where I think I've been very proud of how New York's handled this and being responsible with wearing masks. And where we see, you know, we were giving people flack in like, where's it, Lake of the Ozarks, and also in Florida for spring break about being how irresponsible of them. And now this is happening in our own backyard. So I felt really bad about that. Another thing that I'd also say, as we're talking about going back and how to be preventive, you know, last week I went and got tested and got the antibody test as well. And it's free at CityMD and things like that. And I know that's in a lot of states and cities, it is that. And so if you are bringing people back, you know, to make that as almost a statute of requirement for hiring people on, to start for the clean scratch or with a clean slate, or if somebody does get reported that they have it, to send them to get tested. It's free, and I think we need to, you know, make sure we're taking advantage of that for the long term. So now, Alice, let's dive into this. Culinary Agents just recently did a survey, and would love to hear a little bit about what prompted it as you start to really understand the mind of the employees or the potential employees that are out there.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the things that happened, you know, right when you know, March 15th or mid-March happened, and there was mandatory shutdowns of businesses, et cetera, you know, so I would say heartwarming and also heartbreaking. You saw the entire industry kind of come together and mobilize to not only support each other, but also their teams. And there was a lot of information about, you know, a lot of GoFundMes, a lot of support. You know, I view the positives. I try to see the positives of most things. And, you know, throughout this, there was an opportunity also to educate, I would say, the broader government of how impactful and how huge, the independent restaurants and restaurant industry is and how it affects the overall economy. But then also guests, there were a lot of very heartwarming and heartfelt, comments and things that went out from, restaurant owners, restaurateurs, and just folks who work in the industry about, how passionate they are about the industry, why they do what they do, and how this has impacted them. And you saw a lot of guests kind of have an aha moment and realize, wow, okay, yeah, I can donate, I can share, I'm okay to pay more once we get out of this, right? A little tinge of that. And subsequently, a lot of mobilization around business owners coming together to discuss, how do we really affect change? How can we work together to get our voices heard at the government level, make the necessary changes or fight for them for the PPP, et cetera. And it was really wonderful. But what we noticed is, we have about 830,000 users on our site, talent, and businesses, and 26,000 businesses. And we started fielding a lot of questions from our normal help ticket channels that were unrelated to finding jobs, but more related to like, what do I do, right? Because the business owners are coming together to discuss, what's going to happen. And obviously, if businesses aren't saved, then the jobs, aren't saved either. So it's definitely a chicken and egg situation. But there weren't mechanisms, or there wasn't a way to kind of help the talent get their voice, their concerns voiced, et cetera. And then as I continued to participate on roundtables and share some information to businesses, I realized that there were a lot of hypotheses that kind of were surfaced about subsequent concerns about hiring and rehiring talent, as well as some really great conversations about, what does the team, what does the new team look like, or how do we approach things like, staffing and, rolling out with this uncertainty of, the capacity that we're going to be able to operate at, et cetera. And so we quickly kind of said, well, let's just get a feel of what's going on the talent side. What are their biggest concerns? What are they, it wasn't an in-depth, like we weren't asking about, individual feelings, although we did get a lot of written responses to share them, which was great. But what are the real concerns? And is everybody really making that much more on unemployment, right? You saw this additional unemployment benefit, which was very helpful for many. But was that necessarily the number one concern as to why people wouldn't want to return to work? And obviously, every city, every state, information varied. It even varies from front of house versus back of house as far as people's feelings. But what was really interesting was, collectively over 93% of everyone surveyed said they were most likely or definitely returning to the industry. So this wasn't oh, wow, this happened, let me go do something else. There were real concerns. I mean, out of the 93%, about 60% were definitely coming back. The others were in like the most likely and like likely. And then when you dig into further, like why would they want to come back? 45% said because of their passion of the industry. So passion and determination to come back and essentially serve others, right? Do this job that
we do.
Right. And that was so inspiring and exciting. And that was just, quite frankly, one of the stats, that little compilation of questions, or one of the things that I was really excited to continue to share with business owners, because, being a small business owner, you have so many things to worry about. And then obviously, after you solve and plan for all the different ways your business could potentially survive, you have to hire the right folks that you trust that will execute your, new vision and support you as you continue to rebuild. And that's really tough, so that those are kind of a couple of things. But then digging into it is, even if you're definitely coming back, what are your biggest concerns, right? And then how do we share that with business owners, with talent peers, to not only help talent understand what are the things you can do within your power to prepare yourself, whether it be, educating yourself on, your rights, and also how to protect yourself, and, have that feed into your job search, which are the companies that are aligning themselves with what you just said is the most important thing. If financial security is the absolute most important thing, then look at it, this way. If safety and security is your most important thing, then let's find the businesses that are really being transparent and proactive with how they're going to protect you as an employee, right? It's
Alice,
pretty cut and dry.
In that survey, or just through your experience over the past month or so, is there any real grit though to the idea that these employees want to stay at least on the federal side of the stimulus through the end of July? Or, they want to come back to the industry, but maybe they don't want to come back full time so they can still, maintain the $600 stimulus. Is there any truth to that? Have you seen that? Because I've been hearing that, but I don't run a restaurant. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah. So my logical hat would be like, if there's a win-win situation for both sides, as an employee and an employer, like, let's figure out the best thing for all of us, right? I think what we're seeing is when we splice the data, so we had about, I don't want to misrepresent my numbers here, but we had 42% of all of our folks that we surveyed making less on unemployment, 28% making more, and 25% making the same. So you got a lot of folks making less or the same. So this is not like, well, everyone's making more. The additional $600 a week absolutely helps. We then cut it down by back of house and front of house. Some of the hypotheses were obviously depending on the position, depending on the city, you're probably making more or less. Back of house folks, 40% were making less, 33% making more, and 20% making the same. And front of house was 42% less, 25% more, and 29% the same. They're definitely, honing into that more because, of course, I feel like consistently this kind of experienced line cook position tends to always be this even more challenging on many different levels position. Sure, if you are looking to hire somebody who's a line cook with 2 to 4 years of experience, of industry experience, that happened to be the subcategory of folks making them more on unemployment than they were on their day-to-day. But, I just have the data to back that up. I think everyone already knew that. Now the question is,
too, as you look at it though, right now, if that is an excuse that people, or a reason that people are not trying to go back to work, that if they're waiting until June 31st to this expire, the number of people that are now applying for jobs is going to be much greater. So it's probably going to be harder down the road to get those. And it's a chance for you to come on in a smaller environment and actually really contribute to a team and provide some really important and critical contributions to a team to show your leadership and open you up for responsibilities and opportunities down the road, which might be harder as you get closer to that. So just something that I just realized as we were talking through that says, okay, this clock is ticking, and that might have been the case 2 months ago. And maybe it's even a valid concern not to go back because, as we talked about earlier, if a restaurant closes down again and you then have to be quarantined for 2 weeks, do you lose that unemployment ability there as a result of having just gotten back to work, and then the waiting period, et cetera? So I think there's probably lots of different ways to look at it depending on everyone's situation.
I will say first, absolutely. Just to clarify, the unemployment additional benefits are through July 31st. So we got another
month. Did I say June?
I thought I heard June, but okay, I mean, these days, like.
Oh, I may have. I certainly did mean the end of July.
Just to triple clarify, just in case.
Yes, for everybody listening.
The other thing that was interesting was that one of the highest, the number one reason or big concern was for back of house folks, actually, was finding a job, way above health and security. So what that tells us is that so what's happening is we're kind of in the situation where businesses are really hesitant to kind of say, like, we're hiring, we're still figuring out, we're at reduced capacity, and we're going to try to bring back the people that we've furloughed or laid off, which I think is great. But then the balance of not actually trying to recruit or hire new folks that they might need down the road, but then the message that it sends to talent who are waiting for these jobs is that there are no jobs, right? So there is this interesting thing that's happening where one of the biggest concerns is they're not seeing the jobs, not just yes, culinary agents, of course, but just out there, they're not seeing job. And then they're hearing articles about restaurants kind of struggling and opening and closing. And, but that's a real thing. There's a real uncertainty that is clouding and hovering over everyone, which I think adds to the, potential need and want to just stay with whatever you have now and like do what you can, and then after that you'll deal with it, versus like planning ahead. I do believe what we've seen early indications is the number of job posted volume on us has increased week over week by at least 50%, 50 to 75%, which is a great sign. And again, we're nationwide, so we're also watching and monitoring it by region, by city, state. So but what's great is that the number of applicants that are coming in are 10x for those jobs. So people are, I think there is this realization. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of smart people that whatever additional benefits that are happening now, they're not going to last forever. And to the extent of, using this opportunity from a talent standpoint, using this time to thoughtfully approach, like, where do you want to work? What do you want to do? Have you spent some time upskilling, cross-skilling? Is this kind of an opportunity for you to get in front of employers that will be working on rebuilding their teams, right? And putting your best foot forward.
And one thing that I think is neat about culinary agents, I've always been impressed with this, is that you can express interest for a job or raise a hand for a job, even though it might not be there, and vice versa, where an employer can actually see who's looking for jobs and play offense with it. And so this is where a time where, and oftentimes when, and I've heard chefs say, oh, I don't have time to do this, I'm too busy running my restaurant. Well, your restaurant might not be open right now. So actually, how do you use this time to proactively go out there and recruit and build those relationships with employees? And maybe you're not hiring this week, but you can at least have that conversation with the folks and say, hey, we're going to be hiring in a couple of weeks. Now, make sure you go get tested and make sure you're quarantined, because when we come back, we're going to dive right into it. But that way you can use it as a chance, as you're saying, to help educate the employees about what you're doing. And if that matters to them, their health and safety, you can really lean into that. One other question for you, Alice, is you get to see sort of the blimp view over the country, and you can sort of see the migration patterns and different trends as they go on. Have you seen migrations from one city to the next, or what does it look like from that bird's eye view?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the geekiest way that I would have put it, is that, looking at the data trends of one of the things that we started noticing right away, or I would say a couple of weeks, after the shutdowns, were talent needing to make decisions, people who have lost their job, whether you're a talent or a business owner, if your lease is up, if, you've always been wanting to relocate, and, what better time now? We did see folks, there weren't some specific, like on a regular, Tuesday back in the day, I can actually say that there are correlations between talent moving from city to city based upon similarities of types of jobs and career paths. But the interesting thing here is, I think at a macro level, not just with the industry, you just saw folks kind of relocating and moving, especially as the weeks, progressed and the uncertainty progressed. A lot of people, in a good way, had time to think, had time to reevaluate and reimagine. And I heard a lot of stories, either they came to me, from personal friends or just through somebody else who took this time to really, I always wanted to start my own restaurant, so I'm moving and I'm doing it, or at least giving it a shot. Typically we have seen this from major metro areas kind of going out into other areas. So we are definitely seeing some of that migration. And that's something for businesses to also consider, is that if you have not been keeping lines of communication open with some of the employees that you had intended to bring back, if you haven't checked in with them, or, for many reasons, not good, bad, or the other, but you're thinking about your restaffing plan and your rehiring plans, is sooner than later, open those lines of communication. Because if your intent is to bring some folks back, checking in to see where they are personally, whether it be physically or mentally or both, I think is going to have impacts on, how they feel, how, you rebuild your relationship with them as an employer-employee, but then also it'll help you plan as well. Because if all of a sudden you turn around and, a handful of folks that you were banking on coming back and, revamping with you have moved or relocated, or they haven't had enough time to plan to come back, that's going to affect you as well.
So Alice, I'm curious, because this is an interesting kind of move into the employer's point of view. You're looking at potentially a much bigger talent pool. Obviously, there's still a lot of uncertainty as well. But how do employers kind of take advantage of this potential, access to really great talent situation, and kind of sift through the potential large numbers of opportunities that they could have to bring great people onto their team? What do you think are like the strategies that employers should be taking right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think in general, we've always been a big proponent of employer branding. And you don't have to be a huge company. You don't have to be, you don't have to have a huge budget. Employer brand, what you put out there, how you put out, how you share your mission, your culture, your website, right? There's so many different ways, cheap ways, that you can, showcase and share your culture. I think taking a minute to make sure that your employer brand is expressed, just like folks are really careful in how they curate their pictures and how they communicate to guests. Take that same level of, you're not selling your menu to guests, potential guests. You're selling your business and vision to potential employees, right? So it's a little bit of an audience. And when you think about what do guests want versus what do talent want, you can now break it down to, where should I focus my energy? Talent want career growth. They want to learn. They want a place that has a good culture. They want to work for businesses and people that, stand for or are aligned with what they believe in. And it doesn't have to be, at the fine dining, scale of things. It can be at, whatever level that business is at. And so really taking a minute to, highlight, right? Put your best foot forward of why do you want to work for my company, for us? This is the culture. This is what we believe in. These are the types of people we are looking for. So making sure, again, back to communication and transparency, right? Do you offer, it's almost like, what's your value prop over another business's value prop? Because everyone's going to be, looking to hire, when we first started out, it's like the I don't want to say the one that holds the power, but I think every year as you see things progress, depending on how many opportunities there are in shortage in certain positions, there is leverage in one or the other, right? And so for talent, we would always say, sell yourself to the business. Like, how do you differentiate yourself from somebody else? These days, we see people cross-skilling, upskilling, because they're anticipating that businesses are going to have less employees. So, could I stand out because throughout this time I was upskilling and cross-skilling, and now I know how to do these things, versus, before, when I was just focused in one particular area. So
yeah, that's really interesting. That's something we've talked about quite a bit on here too, kind of at the beginning of all of this during the shutdown. And we start to think, okay, we recognize that businesses are going to need to restructure their model a little bit or pivot in some other direction. But certainly there's going to be maybe positions on the team that either have to shift or maybe don't exist anymore when things reopen. And, we talk a lot about like sommeliers, for example, that was a really nice thing to have in a lot of restaurants for a really long time. But is that going to be a need to have, when things reopen? And, encouraging people who were in those positions to maybe take this time off to educate themselves and build some different skill sets and try to be ready to re-enter the market, maybe doing some slightly different things. So, I guess, how do you, again, from the employer and the business perspective, think about, those shifting positions and how to go about, rehiring some of these people?
Yeah, I think, a lot of what I encourage people to do, which in the past they did less of for various reasons, is really look at your hiring strategy, your team. What do you need? And, I know for a best practice and something that we do is we actually by position, like build a grid on what are the most important attributes that we need and use that as we're interviewing for folks, is like, where do they rank in the most important things that we need in order to fill these particular positions. There absolutely will be, and we see this with businesses already, if they're looking at a phased approach to, you know, opening, if I'm opening at 33% capacity or 25% capacity, whatever it may be, naturally you will need certain positions more than you will others. And some businesses are also looking at, how do I actually build upskilling and reskilling into my processes? Because, you know, maybe I'm hiring someone that is trainable in certain areas that in the past I might have just, you know, had somebody else do. But then also setting that expectation up front. I think going back to this, like, transparency and this trust, is like, you don't want to bait and switch somebody either, you know, hire them for a position and then say, oh, by the way, you know, you need to do all these other things as well. So to the extent of being upfront with not only, you know, the expectations, but also potentially sharing, you know, the reality of, oh, this is how we're potentially rolling out and hiring, and, you know, there will be things that evolve. I think a lot of both sides, I think talent, after going through all this, and a lot of them are really eager and anxious to get back out there, as long as they feel like, you know, there is a little sense of security and safety that's being, you know, proactively addressed with them.
Mhm.
Are there any positions that you're seeing that are either not as prevalent as they were before, or any that are rising, there's more of a demand for than before? You know, Dustin mentioned sommeliers, and in my mind, I also think pastry chefs are those nice to have versus need to have. Are you seeing any shifts of people looking for more of something or less of something from an employer standpoint?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is, as we saw in the past couple of months, is that even as businesses were pivoting and offering to go or, you know, a different business model, certainly that kind of desirable, like, line cook position was pretty consistent, you know, because even if you offered delivery, you still needed somebody to cook the food, right? So we definitely did see that be a little bit more consistent. We did see some folks at the pastry chef, executive chef level, write in some comments about, you know, just like actually encouraging each other to do some, you know, kind of softening the blow a little bit, saying like, hey, you know what, like, you all best, you know, start looking at some cross-skilling and upskilling, because, you know, we used to be a luxury, I think, back in the day. And then we went through this phase in the industry where it was almost a necessity, right? And now it's like, okay, businesses, we are seeing them look at, you know, pastry cooks instead of pastry chefs, right? And, you know, I think everything can point back to businesses trying to figure out how they start crawling before they start running. And, you know, what do they absolutely need in order to do that? The other interesting thing, just sticking to pastry, was that baking, because throughout a lot of this, there was like a lot of bakeries and things that were still open. That seemed to be a skill that was really sought after.
Everybody's been practicing their baking skills, so they can add that to their resume now at home as they go into this. But I think you bring up some really interesting points that I was just thinking about as the employer brand, and that's something that I think is very important, and even more so now as you look at the political climate we're in, and the fact that employees have been able to sit back on the sidelines in some sense and watch how employers have handled this situation with their employees, whether that was they were one of them or not, how they're managing their brand externally now, and then when you look at the social justice issues that are rising, and how they're standing or how they're expressing that, and the initiatives that are coming out of it. So in a time when, especially when you look at the demographic of a lot of the entry level positions or people in their 20s and 30s, let's just say, that becomes even more of a relevant, they're putting their personal brand behind that, and they want to have not just a paycheck, but also a job that they can be aligned with from a value standpoint. So I think that's really key.
100%.
Were there any overall surprises that you had, or anything that caught your eye? I was like, wow, I didn't think that, or, you know, very interesting, that made you ask yourself, why is that?
I think like the two things that kind of stood out the most were how many folks that were like definitely coming back, right? Because I think the feel that a lot of employers had across the board were kind of like, wow, okay, this, because of the way this has all happened, you know, folks are kind of re-examining, do I even want to be in this industry? If I need, you know, security and you know, this uncertainty is really, you know, stressful and on all levels. So with, you know, with 93% of folks that were like, I'm either definitely or I'm most likely coming back, and then why, that was super, you know, exciting for me to share, as well as the fact that, you know, passion being the number one reason. I think a lot of people knew that, but it's always nice to get the data to support it. I think it was really interesting to see how many people were making less on unemployment, and kind of the balance of who was making more, who was making less, and who's making the same. So I wouldn't necessarily say that's a big driver for people not wanting to come back to the industry. And then overall, you know, the number one concern, especially for back of house, was finding a job. It had nothing to do with, I mean, financial security was the second, but that's related to finding a job. You know, safety, health and safety was kind of, you know, lower down the ranking, which, you know, for front of house was a little higher, which is understandable. But then for us, we're always looking at how do we take that into like actions, like what are the recommendations coming out of the data, and how does that actually help both sides prepare for, you know, quite frankly, the uncertainty that is, you know, going to be upon us, right?
So I have a question, and this is not a planned question, and maybe it might be a little contentious. So we'll see what the guy Salvatore might start, you know, freaking out. But
here we go. I love making Salvatore uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's our new favorite thing to do. Wages, and I don't mean minimum wage, but I think the age of, you know, general managers or wine directors or pastry chefs or people who are salaried making pretty big wages at nice restaurants. Do you think that these people should expect the same sorts of compensation now as they were before?
I'll take that first, I guess, if that was directed towards me.
Yes, I think it was.
Do I think that they should expect? My initial answer is no, but that's a personal. I also apply. You know, if you look at everyone, right? How many folks had to take salary cuts? How many folks were furloughed? You know, across the board. You know, leadership and, you know, my team to make sacrifices to keep people on staff. That piece, as far as resetting expectations of what people are entitled to or what they should expect, I think is something that people can really take a step back and kind of think realistically about. To the extent of just going through that process before you start your kind of search for reemployment, I think is going to help ease the, you know, expectations on both fronts. I think businesses need to be very clear with you know, setting the expectations. You know, there are some businesses that may do like a tiered comeback. You know, it's like the first, as the business is growing, and I think it's very fair, is, you know, some sort of a tiered comeback to a certain agreed upon salary or whatever it may be. I think that's going to be on a case by case basis. But I think talent need to kind of reset their expectation and be realistic about what, it's not what you think you deserve. It's about, you know, if you're going to choose to come back to help essentially rebuild the industry, right? Help this employer reestablish and get back on that track of success, whatever the success is defined with you jointly, and you choose to work there. I think all those conversations need to happen up front. And you know, what you were making or what you think you should have been making, you know, 5 months ago is a very different time now. You know, I know across the board in technology, you know, the layoffs, you know, reduced salaries across many industries is a real thing.
I think that's, I agree. I wasn't uncomfortable with that, Dustin, but thank you for being conscious of my feelings as we talk through this. But I agree with what Alice said. And I think there's so many uncertainties, and we've talked about restaurants opening, then having to reclose, you know, tearing up at capacity. I think it's, you, as an employer, being clear and saying, hey, here's where we are, here's where I'd like to get to, and we have mile markers along the way, and we can assess when we get down there. But to think that you're going to be able to come right back in at that salary might be, I don't think it's a disconnect from the times that we're living in right now. And having that conversation up front, and even if you're saying, hey, it could be available in a bonus by the end of the year, depending on where we are, I think that's the best way to go about it. And you have a job, and here's what that could lead to.
I think, Sabto, I like that idea. The commission, I like commission based. I like those types of incentives, because if you're not hungry, you don't eat, and so you should try to make that portion of your salary up. Give a person, an employee, an opportunity to succeed, and succeed, and see what they do with it. And if it's
not to
more,
mention, restaurants need to rebuild the cash reserves, which they've completely depleted. So if you want to be a team player, you need to understand that your success is also having a solid foundation with which to run that business on. So it's all if you're playing the long game, that's the smart way to do that. So
yep.
What do you got, Mike?
Okay, we got a question here from Ricardo, asking about what is the best way to find a job abroad. I don't know if Culinary Agents is international, but I thought I'd give you the opportunity to answer that question.
We are international, largely because we're internet based. And then a couple of years ago, we did have a test push into France, Italy, and the UK. Depends on the country. It's not our sweet spot. We don't focus, but we make it available. So there are businesses in other countries that have their "I want to work here" turned on, and you're more than welcome to proactively submit something. I always encourage folks to think about businesses or places that you want to work, and most places do have some sort of web presence, and they are open to people submitting in questions and stuff, and just be proactive about it.
Great. Well, we have a few questions for you, and so Dustin's going to kick it off. It's what we call the Freerun freestyle. We're going to just kind of squeeze out the last bit of that Freerun juice, get the best stuff going here. Dustin, go ahead.
So Alice, when things kind of return to normal, when this is all over, what is the restaurant that you are most looking forward to visiting?
Man, you guys saved the hardest questions for the end. Oh man. Just off the top of my head, I'm thinking Via Carota.
I'll meet you there.
Love it. Great pick.
Sabato, what do you got?
If you're not a restaurateur, you don't play one on TV, but you have a great deal of insight into the restaurant industry. If you were to design and come up with a restaurant concept that you think would be flourishing when we come out of this, what's that need that the market needs right now?
Oh man. I mean, I don't know. I take a pass on that. I want to say like veggie stuff, but I mean, that's like fake meat type of thing. But I actually think that I forget what country it is, but and I'm gonna kick myself later, but the restaurant, I think it's somewhere in Europe, maybe Copenhagen, that is a greenhouse, and then they have these mini greenhouses by the water. I thought that was a real brilliant way to kind of stay with the brand and do something that people need and want.
I like it.
My question for you is, any words of wisdom you would impart upon us and and listeners today? Final words of wisdom.
Final words of wisdom. I would say, well, stay positive. I happen to be somebody who wants to be efficient and use time all the time, the best way that I can. Use this time. If you have some free time, learn something, do something, be curious, have an opinion, educate yourself. I always say, if you can't take advantage, time is one of the things I feel like people in this industry never have enough of, right? Everyone else is playing, you're working. The hours are grueling. There's never an end to all the requests and all the things that you want to do above and beyond for your guests. So if you have a little bit of time, take some time for yourself and then be productive with it.
That's great. And I want to say that the line of the day for me came from you: trust and transparency. I'm going to start using that. I love it. And I think it's critical for everybody to keep that in mind. So that's great advice. One more question is the survey that you've been talking about today, is that up? Is that something that we could all just log into and go read?
I am
available
going
to
to
us?
send it. We are finalizing it. I think the team was sending me the final
Cool.
iterations of it now. We wanted to make it pretty and visual so that
Yeah.
it's easily digestible. So we're going to do one overview of the industry and then one by front of house and back of house. And I will absolutely send it so you can share it.
That's
Can't wait
great.
to see that.
What a great resource. Well, thank you for joining us today, Alice. We really have enjoyed the time, and thank you for making time for us. Everybody else, thank you for joining us. As always, we appreciate you spending your Monday afternoon with us. And please give us a like and tell your friends to watch us. You can. This is while we do it live, it's also recorded, and will soon be available by podcast. I know that we keep promising that, and we are working on it. Hopefully within the next week or so. One final quote from me: if you can't soar with the eagles if you're out all night hooting with the owls. And that's for Dustin, because in Aspen he always is out hooting with the owls. And I always tell him, you gotta get to bed earlier.
I'm going to go make bumper stickers the rest of my afternoon and put that on there. So
I think that you should, Sabato. Thank you. In any event, thank you everybody, and we will see you next week. Can't wait. Alice, thank you again so much.
Thank you. Bye, guys.